So, hello and welcome to Media Musings, where we are closing off Kubrick month with the film that he probably had the least to do with.
Mm.
So, while we will very likely be tearing, while we will most likely be tearing this film a well-deserved new one, I'm not exactly prepared to put it on Kubrick's shoulders because,
Yeah.
as I was telling Noodle, or rather Spartacus, um, in the green room, that um, the script for this movie was basically like a three-way tug of war between Stanley Kubrick, uh, Trumbo, and the executive producer Kirk Douglas. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that name, he also plays the lead and titular role.
All right.
We
Just before we go any further,
yeah.
fair warning, I've just had a text message from my energy supplier in my area telling me to only call them if there is an immediate danger to life if I lose power in
Okay.
Storm Arwen. So if I cut out abruptly, that's why. Although I do have my phone fully charged, so I'll probably be able to jump back on.
Okay.
Um, Sorry, just had to.
Yeah.
I didn't want to just disappear and yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Good to know. Um and
yeah.
so uh so basically, Kirk Douglas had essentially a lot of the say so on the script, and it really shows.
Yeah.
And Kubrick went on record later saying that he despised the moralizing done in Spartacus, and that is why he exercised such stringent control over all of his subsequent films. So basically, we have Spartacus to thank for the way Kubrick's career went.
Yeah. I will say the moralizing in this film is irritating. It's
Yeah,
quite obviously an American made film.
yeah,
And it's quite obviously an attempt at American propaganda, which we'll get into.
yeah,
Um, I am not going to comment on the historical accuracy of most of this. Suffice to say that the last hour and a half of the film has no basis in historical fact.
yeah.
And the first hour and a half of the film has a very shaky basis in historical fact. um, so yeah, it's a film like most Kubrick films. If you sit there and you try and be picky about historical accuracy, you're gonna come a cropper
Yeah.
because you're not gonna appreciate the film for what it is. This film is it's more like a western than anything else, and it is American propaganda in the canon of westerns.
Um,
I will explain why as we go on.
though, um,
Or to put it another way, I did a module at university on the American West and
yeah.
had to watch this film. When I took a class on ancient Roman cinema, this film was not on the reading list.
Hmm.
And I think that says it all.
Though, I, I'd say actually I'd put it more in the quote-unquote biblical epic genre.
I have my reasons against that, and I'm sure we'll get into them.
But
yeah, let's dive in and see where we go with this.
Because it was written and produced at the very tail end of the Hollywood blacklist. It's actually one of the 2 movies that broke the blacklist.
But it's American propaganda in a different way. America has this mentality about itself that it's the underdog, it's the little guy. That it has the moral high ground in battles, and this speaks to the mentality of America at the time.
Yeah.
And it speaks very much to the same mentality that spawned the Western genre.
Oh.
Which is the idea of the little guy, the one-man band, going out there through the power of ethical behaviour and moralising wins the day, or wins the loyalty of hundreds of thousands of people, and dies honourably, dies without screaming and bawling and crying about it. And if he does die, he still wins the moral victory and still wins the spiritual victory of his legacy being something more than himself.
And and here's another thing. There is a bit of a manifest, like there's I'm loath to call it a dog whistle because it's pretty fucking there if you look at it.
It's pretty blatant, yeah.
But in the opening, narration, there's a very specific line.
Go on.
That reads to a certain, not the actual doctrine of manifest destiny, but a certain manifest destiny.
Go on. You say it. You made the point, you say it.
Yeah. So the line is, he dreamed of an end to slavery, something that won't happen for another 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The slavery we think of in 2021, when we think of American plantations, Jamaican plantations, race-based slavery, the Atlantic slave trade, is not. The only thing it really has in common with ancient slavery is what we call it.
Yeah.
Ancient slavery, it actually gets quite a good rep in this film.
Yeah.
It's shown very well, and the highs and lows of it are shown. There is also a very Christian undercurrent to this film.
Yeah.
Which is, for anyone out there, Spartacus predates the Christian narrative
by
about 70 years.
And the thing is, they even acknowledge that in the opening.
Yeah.
In the opening narration.
But that doesn't stop them with their very American attempts at lending certain scenes gravitas by invoking a single deity. Now, this is my first little bugbear, and it's one of the few things of historical accuracy that irritated me.
Yeah.
Throughout this film, we see characters say, "God be with you. God bless you." First of all, which God?
Yeah.
Second of all, yes, the Romans... If a Roman said to you, God bless, there would be an immediate assumption that what they're talking about is Jove, which is the equivalent to Zeus,
Yeah.
the father of the gods. However, the situations in which they use those terms are not situations in which you would invoke Zeus. The situations, for example, there's one where quite obviously the god being invoked would be Mars, possibly Aphrodite, for protection in war. Or Venus, as she's known to the Romans.
Yeah.
And this film makes the same mistake a lot of films do when they try and show ancient polytheism. They make the mistake of just, and I'm quoting an academic when I say this, they present it as Christianity with funny hats.
Yeah.
Yeah. Troy does it, where, you know, it looks like Christianity, but it's all gold, and they're a little bit odd, and they make funny noises.
Yeah.
And it's a way to try and appeal to the audience's, what's familiar to the audience, and not alienate the audience from that aspect of the experience that it's trying to show.
Yeah.
But it is completely ahistorical. There is no basis in it.
And
especially this thing where we get to the end where Spartacus says, I imagine there is a god for slaves. There is a god for slaves. Slaves worship the same gods as their masters in Rome.
Yeah.
They were required to. Literally required to. The whole household worshipped the same deities. It was pretty much a requirement.
Yeah.
And there are certain gods that appeal to slaves throughout history. Dionysus, not the character in the film, the actual god.
Yeah.
Dionysus appealed to women and slaves quite a lot because it's that freedom from cultural bounds that they were stuck in on a regular basis. Mithras appealed to soldiers. Different sects of society would tend to worship different gods in different ways.
Yeah.
And the gods would generally be a reflection of what that sect of society did. There was no slave god as such, but what there would have been deities who slaves worshipped, slaves came to the temples, those kind of things, because there were aspects of that god that spoke to their lived experience.
Yeah.
So that entire thing, I see what they were going for, and they were going for the rom-com 2/3 of a way through a Western movie where he says goodbye to the pretty girl because he knows he might die in the morning scene.
Yeah.
But to anyone who has any vague understanding of what the religion was like back then, it strikes false because it's so wrong.
Yeah.
That to me threw me out of that scene. But again, that's my one bugbear. Like, that's one of my bugbears. There's another bugbear we'll get into later on.
Yeah.
But I've only really got two bugbears on the accuracy of this film, and that's one of them.
Also, when they basically use the two antagonists, villain characters, to essentially do some red baiting.
Yeah.
Because I think both Crassus and Gracchus have a line where they go, "Oh, no one actually believes in the god, but we must keep up appearances."
Yeah, so they're in the bathhouse, and he says something about the gods. He says, "Oh, you've caught religion. I never thought you'd catch religion." That scene.
Well, and there's a scene where Gracchus purchases a chicken to sacrifice.
Yeah. It's listen. The Romans weren't all pious, 100% believers all the time.
Yeah.
In the same way, look, we have a saying in modernity: "There's no atheists in a foxhole."
Yeah.
That's filtered through to civilian life from the military.
Yeah.
Or wherever it came from originally, I don't know, and I don't really care. That's what's going on there. And that was absolutely something that happened in ancient Roman times. A lot of people would go through the motions, might not necessarily believe it. Ancient Roman polytheism was a religion of works, not of grace, for the Christians out there.
Yeah.
Who understand what that means. They did as they were told. They went through the motions. And that was all that was required of them. They weren't required to believe. But everyone knows when the chips are down and you've got nothing else to go for and you're scared, if there's even a small part of you that believes, you're gonna turn.
Yeah.
And you're gonna... A prayer never hurt. Sending up a prayer never hurt.
Yeah.
And that's what that scene's showing. Which... Yeah, so actually, yeah, that to me is more religiously accurate than a lot of things in this film. But to me, what this film... And I hate to compare it to Gladiator.
Yeah.
Although, because we remember how I tore that film apart. This concept of the ideal of Rome being an almost sacred image, an almost sacred thing,
Yeah.
is pure Hollywood propaganda. And it's designed there. Yes, there were people who believed in Rome and in the ideal of Rome. Absolutely there were. And there will have been people who were like making these lovely speeches and things.
Yeah.
But they would have been in the tiny, tiny minority.
Yeah.
And the idea of Rome as being some sort of sacred thing, only insofar as the Vestal Virgins were required to keep the flame going.
Yeah.
It's a really weird Hollywood thing. And here's a trick. Anytime you hear a character make a speech like that in a film about ancient Rome, think about the building you're imagining them talking about. And 9 times out of 10, it's either the Washington Monument or it's the White House.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's invoking. It's not invoking Rome. It's invoking the idea of America and the experiment, and that's what it's aimed. That's what it's a. I don't want to call it a dog whistle because it's not racist.
Yeah.
But that's what it's aiming for.
But yeah, it's based, and it's a lot easier to see in Spartacus.
Yeah.
But it's basically saying, watch how the glorious Roman Republic is crumbling into empire, and look at how America is doing it better.
Yeah, because we got rid of slavery rather than punishing the slaves.
Yeah. So, I think you misconstrued the point I was making.
Go on.
So, about red baiting.
Go
on. Particularly in the scene with Gracchus and Caesar, right after what's his name is, the first leader of the garrison is sent out to deal with Spartacus before he gets his ass absolutely stomped off screen.
Yeah.
Gracchus purchases a chicken and talks about how he's going to make a sacrifice in the temple, and says, no one really believes, but we must keep up appearances for the public. And you gotta remember, this is made during the height. This was made during the end of the height of McCarthyism, where godless and godless and Soviet and communist infiltrator were one and the same in the minds of the American public.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. This is what I mean by American propaganda. Spartacus and the people around him have a proto-Christian mentality towards religion and faith.
Yeah.
The Romans we see don't. They're presented as, change their clothes and give them Russian accents, and that could, some of those Senate scenes could be the Duma.
Yeah.
And that's what it's doing. And I'm a great believer in any film you watch, especially a period piece, especially a historical drama. Always watch it with a mind to the original audience it was being pitched to.
Yeah.
You see it a lot. The entire genre of Vietnam War films.
Yeah.
Is just a list of what America wanted to be told, or what America wanted to present itself as. They won in all the movies. Well, yeah, but
which is kind of ironic. Because we're talking about how a lot of emphasis is put on demonizing the Romans, making the Romans godless and degenerate, and this is the reason why Rome was not as good as America is. But it kind of makes it ironic considering the fact that the oyster scene was haze coated.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised it was haze coated.
Yeah, and it had to be edited back in. It had to be restored in 1991. Fun fact: during that scene, you're not hearing Crassus's, the actor who plays Crassus. You're not hearing his actual voice. You're actually hearing Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah. Okay, that brings me on to my second bugbear.
Yeah.
My second historical accuracy bugbear. The oyster scene. Or the private bath.
Yeah.
You've got Crassus and Antoninus. And it is perfectly normal for a Roman patrician, senator, trying to remember what class he was, of high standing to have a pretty body attendant.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing you have to be aware of is that a body attendant or a body slave kind of doesn't mean what you think it means, but also does. A better translation for what that person's role is would be valet, as in Downton Abbey valet.
Yeah.
He's there to dress the master of the house, he's there to serve him his food, he's there to make sure his colours are starched, make sure he's, see to him when that's what he's there for. Make sure his cufflinks are on and he's got his tobacco in his pocket, all these little things.
Yeah.
That's what a valet is there for. That's what a body slave is there for. However, in Roman times, yes, it did occasionally extend to exactly what this entire scene is insinuating.
Yeah.
Very clumsily, I might add. But there was no moralising over it. So this entire scene is ridiculous. There was no moralising in ancient Rome about a rich upper-class man sleeping with his slave, male or female.
Yeah.
There would have been no moralising. It was just accepted that it would happen.
Yeah.
It was kind of expected. And it certainly wouldn't have made any difference to them whether it was male or female. It was just who they appreciated. In modernity, we have a sex and or gender paradigm in which we explain and understand human sexuality.
Yeah.
My sexuality is defined by the sex and or gender of people I am attracted to.
Yeah.
In ancient times, it wasn't like that. The paradigm in which sex was understood was a model of penetrator and receiver, or penetrator and penetratee.
Now,
the penetrator.
Sorry.
The penetrator would always be the, if you like, the dominant one.
Yeah.
The master, the man who goes to the brothel, the older male if they were following the Greek style and it was a younger man.
Yeah.
There was nothing morally considered wrong with that. What was considered morally wrong was when a man of high social standing, and it was invariably a man of high social standing, was found to be effeminate, as in he preferred the receiving role.
Yeah.
Or he behaved in a manner, you know how we talk about, in the 21st century, we talk about being whipped? Yeah. Like if someone's so madly in love that, you know, they're cooing in the streets and they're flowers and, you know, they're singing in the rain, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
If a man behaved like that, he was considered, he's been made effeminate.
Yeah.
And also, if it became known that he preferred the receiving role, particularly if he preferred the receiving role and he was sleeping with his slaves, which you couldn't get much lower in Roman understanding of the sexuality paradigm. It was all about the act itself. Like the religion. The religion wasn't about belief, it was about the act. This is not about attraction, this is about the act itself.
Yeah. Which, and Noodle can hopefully correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll try.
Reminds me, like, of the fact that I stumbled, so I may very well be wrong because I just kind of stumbled on it, right? That Julius Caesar's troops had a song they sang about him, about how he's every man's woman and every woman's man.
Again, propaganda. Be careful what you read and where you find it.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know how much accuracy there is to that. But Caesar certainly had a reputation as a womanizer.
Yeah.
That much we know. It's also reasonably accurate that there'll have been a few younger boys. There was... The insinuations can be made about Brutus. They can be made about several people in Caesar's life. But there's not much by way of, you know...
Well, and also, to be fair, it like, having been in the military, it doesn't take much to make something into a dirty cadence.
Yeah.
Like, soldiers will make cadences out of anything. And it doesn't need to be true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
sorry, someone just asked in the chat, was Caesar almost a man-eater? No, that was Hannibal, but not the one we would be talking about in this context.
Yeah. Though, I think also because there's a bit of delay, that might have been a reply to the Anthony Hopkins thing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, to be fair. I don't think the delay is that long.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the other bugbear with this, the sexual moralizing.
Yeah.
The idea that Spartacus would have got to 30, at least 40 years old, I would say, given that he's starting to go grey.
Yeah.
and never slept with a woman
Yeah.
is ridiculous, even for a slave. Even for someone, even if he had been born into slavery, which is completely wrong, by the way, folks.
Yeah.
The real Spartacus was a Roman soldier who basically went AWOL, got captured and sold into slavery as punishment. It's not realistic. It's not reasonable to expect that.
Yeah.
It's just not. Yeah, those are, you've hit all my bugbears really early on.
Yeah.
Other than that, this film's a fair yarn. It's a decent watch. Could I have done without the intermission in the friggin' middle of it and the random fucking 10-minute overture at the start? Yeah.
Yeah, especially the fact that the screen is completely blank during it.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. But I can see what they were going for. They were going in the style of the epics. There's another film that does it. Which one's the one with the chariot races?
Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hur does it as well. And it's basically going for that theatricality. That, that's the kind of thing you'd expect if you went to an actual theatre to see this played live.
Yeah.
That's what it's going for. And to be fair, 3.5 hours to sit in a cinema is a long time, so I can understand putting an intermission in.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yes, Gilded Rose, that is what happens in Gladiator. A Gladiator is a completely different story, it's completely fictional, but you can tell that they did kind of borrow from the Spartacus thing with the character in Gladiator. Yeah. So yeah, good shout on that. But also with this, I can see where Kubrick got his idea for the 3-part film.
Yeah.
Because this film, you have, again, it almost splits into 3 parts. You have Capua.
Yeah.
You have the journey to the sea, if you like.
Yeah.
And then you have the final battle and aftermath. It's got that very clear 3-act
structure.
Yeah. Oh, hi Santa. I didn't realise that was you.
Yeah, Santi did a slight rebrand.
But yeah. Kubrick likes his 3-act structures. I don't blame him. It's a classic for a reason. The 3-act structure has been around since ancient Greece, if not longer. It's simple, it's effective, and it presents a very clear, okay, this is where I am in the film. It's a roadmap to the film itself.
Yeah.
I think our best way of tackling this is to deal with each structure separately, going into it now. Now you've got my bugbears out the way and we've said our initial bits.
Yeah. So...
Capua.
Yeah, Capua.
Okay, so... From a historical perspective...
Yeah.
Quite accurate to how gladiators would have been treated. And I mean that from a point of view of the training and the way they were treated. And he says, you're going to be pampered. He says to them, they're like prize stallions. They need to be pampered.
Yeah.
That's how gladiators were treated. They were very, very well trained.
They were basically the sports stars of their era.
Yeah, they were the boxers. They were the Amir Khans, the... I don't follow boxing. Someone help.
Muhammad Ali's.
The Muhammad Ali's, the Sphinxes. That was... You can look at modern day boxing or wrestling if you're a WWE, WWF, whatever it calls itself now fan.
Or like, say, even football, they were their Aaron Rodgers,
Yeah. They were the Premiership footballers, the Formula One drivers, the really highly trained specialist sports people.
Well, I mean, really I'd say chariot racers were probably the Formula One
drivers. But on a level of fitness and the kind of regimes they had and the kind of treatment they got, it would be on a par. Obviously not technically, but if we're looking at equivalent treatment...
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're talking about that level of celebrity as well. Like, we're talking... Some gladiators got so... popular that upper class Roman women would pay to have them for a night in exactly the way you're thinking when they didn't have fights the following day.
So
there was also a market in vials of gladiator sweat.
So what you're saying is the patricians could smell what The Rock was cooking.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And they bottled it and they sold it. And they wore it as perfume. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
This is it's a known thing. Like, if anyone tells you that you are too much of a fan or you are too obsessed with a particular famous person, by all means use the example I've just given, shrug, and then you can always say, well, at least it's not a new thing.
Yeah.
We're talking modernity about parasocial relationships, but holy hell.
Yeah, and if you think that, that just died with Rome and came back in our new decadent era, no. Women threw their panties at List.
Ew. That was not a mental image I needed.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always been a thing. For as long as there are people who are famous, there are people who are borderline creepy about how much they love them.
Yeah.
And the same cough I've had for like 2 months now. Ugh.
Ugh.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Right. The one thing that this film really gets right, and I want to hammer this because there's very little this film gets right, but I do want to hammer this home. There's little bits throughout the film where you'd say, where's that slave from? Where's that slave from? Where's that one from? Where's that one from?
Yeah.
That one's described by the fact that he's got a big nose, and that one's described by his skin colour, and that one's described, she's from Brittany, and he's from Gaul, and that's exactly how the Romans talked about their slaves.
Yeah.
There was no... There's a great line in sort of the Capua segment where the women are choosing who they want to fight.
Yeah.
And he says, the Ethiopians are well known for their trident. There's only one man who stands a chance against him, and that's the Gaul.
Yeah.
They were kind of... They weren't racist. They hated everyone and despised everyone equally. In very blunt terms. All they cared,
So here's a question for you. Because I could read it either way.
Go on.
In that scene particularly, where he's pointing out all the different gladiators. So do you think Batiatus is giving genuine advice, or is he trying to steer them towards the less hopeful ones?
No, what he's trying to do is minimize his losses.
Yeah, that's the vibe I kind of caught too.
He's looking at this and he's thinking, right, he knows he's going to be paid regardless.
Yeah.
But he also knows that I hate it. I hate talking about human beings like this.
Yeah.
Even though it's fictional, I hate talking about human beings like this. But it's kind of like picking a dog in a litter. It's kind of like picking dogs. You can have 12 dogs, 12 very good dogs, and you can make a sled team, but only one of those dogs is your lead dog.
Yeah.
And that's because that dog is something special.
Yeah.
He's got a group of people there, and he knows they're all competent fighters, but only one or two of them are going to make it big. And he's already got them pegged. He already knows, okay, that one I can send to Rome, that one I can send up north, and he'll last 5 years, he'll last 3 years, he'll last 10 years.
Yeah.
He might earn his freedom. I want to keep that one because that one's going to earn me a lot of commission in future. He's got them pegged. It's like picking racehorses. He knows. And what he doesn't want to do is lose his best chance at profit. This man is pure greed. This man is the embodiment of greed. We established that very early on, and he maintains it throughout. He's a greedy coward. That's all he is.
Yeah.
And he's very much trying to maximize his profits.
Yeah.
He does that. You notice when he's pointing to them, he tells them to bring one out. Says, "Look at his shoulders," and he's a little short ass. He's about 5'7".
Yeah.
Poor bloke. And you think anyhow he goes up against that 6'4" black dude, he's a dead man.
Oh yeah. You know,
but he knew that little skinny bloke was never gonna do anything special.
Yeah.
So that's why he pointed him out. That's the entire thing that's going on in that scene. But the women catch him out. The women know better.
Yeah.
They know they're being played, and he's trying to, he's got the gift of the gab and he's trying it on. There's a great line from one of the women where she says, don't leave them in their suffocating tunics in this heat. Leave them in only what's there for modesty.
Yeah.
The women were absolutely getting off on seeing these burly, sweaty men fight to the death. That's what's going on there. I don't, everyone's got a kink, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah. Can you put the last comment up, please? This is right. They used oil to clean with, and the average Roman went to the baths at least 5 times a week. And I'm not talking about the upper class Romans, I'm talking about the average Roman.
Well,
went to the baths every day.
And I'm pretty sure this is in response to my comment about Liszt. Liszt was in the late 18th, early 19th century.
Like he was gross.
Yeah, he was a contemporary of Beethoven and Mozart.
Yeah. So the ancient Romans we have this image of the ancient Romans as being quite dirty. The city was dirty. And they didn't have germ theory.
Yeah.
But they were actually very clean people. As a culture, culturally, it was, as it is today, it was stigmatized to be dirty.
Which is also kind of something the film gets right, given how many bath scenes there are.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. The ancient Roman baths were the equivalent of the 17th century, the 18th century tavern in America. Yeah. Or the salons of France, of Versailles. They were where all the business went down, all the socializing happened. Yeah, they were just that it gets absolutely right as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to Capua. The way that fight went down, I can see what the film was getting at. I don't know if if there's anything to attest to that historically. I don't think there is.
Yeah.
The idea of a gladiator refusing to kill in the arena. I've said the word ridiculous too many times on this stream already, but it's a bit ridiculous.
So
there was real glory And there was real pride in being the gladiator to deliver the kill blow.
Yeah.
The idea that this man wouldn't, despite the fact that they'd only ever spoken once, and that was when the guy basically told him, I don't want to talk to you because I might have to kill you one day.
Yeah.
And then all they'd done is share a couple of funny looks before they went out to fight.
Yeah.
The idea that he wouldn't, and he would choose not to.
Well, I mean, there was also the training montage.
Yeah, but again, it's not...
Yeah.
They know they're training to kill each other.
Yeah.
They know that from the off. And there's a comment passed where they said, when they're in the Senate later on, where they say there are more slaves in Rome than citizens. That's true as well. But Rome... There's a quote, I can't remember who it's attributed to. If anyone knows, hit me up in the comments. Where he says, at one point there were 3 times as many slaves as citizens in the city of Rome. The only reason the slaves didn't rise up is because don't teach slaves to count. Because if they count, they'll realise there's more of them than there are of us.
Yeah.
They knew they were on a knife edge. And they were 1 or 2 tiny fuck-ups from all-out revolution when they had slaves.
Yeah.
That's why the violence is there. It's bred in circuses.
Yeah.
If you don't behave yourself as a domestic slave, you'll go to the arena. If you refuse to fight or you can't fight, you'll go end up being a galley slave. Now, galley slave was the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
That is... They live their life under decks of a ship, rowing anything up to 20 hours a day, minimal food and rations. They would sit in chains, and they'd just be rowing constantly, rowing. In all weathers, whenever a ship, that's a galley slave.
Yeah.
And that role is not something most people would wish on their worst enemy, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my sort of overview of Capua. It gets the spirit of gladiatorial combat right. There's a few niggly bits in there that are a bit odd. Like, yes, they would have had the armour.
Yeah.
But it would have been unlikely to be chain. It would have been more likely to be plate than chain.
I don't think chainmail came along until later.
There are images of them where it's drawn like that, so it looks like chain, and we think there might have been something that looked like it. But more likely than not, it would have been plate armour, the kind of thing that you'd see in a armour from a medieval castle, like that shoulder and arm plate.
Yeah, it would have been a pauldron.
Yeah. Can you tell military history is not my area? So yeah. The idea of a gladiator slave not performing the kill is ludicrous, but it's also a plot point, so we can forgive it.
Yeah.
Your guess is as good as mine what actually triggered Spartacus to kick off in real life.
Yeah.
It was at Capua, was 73 BC, I think. Yes, it was. Wait, no, it was Julius... Yes, it must have been BC. It was Julius Caesar. What am I...
I mean, yeah, it was, before, just before Caesar, because...
Caesar appears in this film.
Well, also, Pompey at the time was out, fighting the Parthians in the east.
Yeah. And actually, the contextualizing of it within the history of ancient Rome is very well done.
Yeah.
No arguments with that. But again, Spartacus had been a Roman soldier. He'd been sold into slavery. Therefore, of course, he was going to try and organise a rebellion first chance he got.
Yeah.
You know, when you've known freedom to be sold into slavery, you know, if anyone's ever seen Roots, how many times did he try to run?
Yeah.
You know, at one point they had to threaten to cut his foot off to stop him running.
But, okay, so, I have a hypothesis, which I'm very much like, which I'm very certain is true, but it's not really something that, like, that I can, get, like, unless I can find an interview with Kirk Douglas. Because I think Spartacus being born a slave, it is a Kirk Douglas thing.
I imagine so.
Because he wanted to draw parallels between the slaves and the Jewish people.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of there's a Jewish undercurrent. Again, with the oyster and snail scene, which we're going to come to. Why is a Roman asking a slave about what we imagine are Jewish meal customs? Yeah. Like, and the insinuations and what's going on there. I've already talked about that, but it's just weird. It's really weird for a Roman to do that.
Well, though, when it got haze coated, they were gonna. They offered to change the foods to, like, artichokes and some other vegetable.
Peaches?
Yeah.
They'd have been a bit ahead of their time if they'd have done that.
Yeah.
Either way, the same messaging is there. We all know that's just the Roman trying to come out badly.
Yeah.
It is what it is. I've seen it done worse in much more recent films. So yeah.
Yeah.
There is... we'll get to it, but the whole Antoninus thing and his relationship with other men in this film is a thing.
Yeah.
Very much a thing.
But yeah. I will say, also, this is where the romance plot is started between Spartacus and Verinia.
Yeah. Can we hand wave that, please? Because it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, no. See, I want to make a very important point about this, and it's not anything about the plot.
It's about the fact that he doesn't sleep with her that first night, isn't it?
No, it's about the score.
You mean the score that's eerily similar to most Western romances? Or
no.
That's eerily similar to most romances in general?
So, basically...
As well as the cinematography.
No, so no, it's basically about how this motif that plays in the scenes where, Spartacus and Verinia share a glance all throughout the film. Near the end, it picks up again, but this time Spartacus is looking at the entirety of the people.
Yeah. I would call it the love theme.
Yeah.
There is this... Films, TV shows like to do a thing when they introduce a protagonist, especially one who's not very sympathetic. Yeah. Like, Spartacus just isn't up until this point. He's not that sympathetic. He's a gladiator. He's a fighter.
He tried to hamstring a guard with his teeth.
Yeah. He's arrogant. He's, he's impetuous, as they said. You know, we get the impression he might be a little bit of a coward because he didn't, after the scene in the courtyard with the trainer.
Well,
or at
no,
least he's either a coward or he's very intelligent, one or the other, and we don't know which yet.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you could say he's arrogant and defiant, but given the audience that it was intended for, that's probably a plus.
Yeah, that's probably a plus for that audience. But he's not very sympathetic. He hasn't spoken much. He's not... He's an image. He's an archetype at this point. He's the gladiator. That's all he is. This scene with her does a few things.
Yeah.
Firstly, it humanises him. And it's really important that it humanises him, because if we don't have that scene with her, and we don't have the weird-ass romantic subplot with her...
Yeah.
He's not a sympathetic protagonist. We don't involve ourselves in his life and his feelings. We just don't.
Yeah.
It then becomes more an epic in the epic style, where we feel like we are actually watching it on screen as opposed to actually identifying with the characters.
Also...
secondly, he doesn't sleep with her, and that's really important. Because she's there under duress, and so is he. It's really important, and it does take a moral tone on it. But from a point of view of character development, it's really important they don't sleep together until they've escaped. Because if they sleep together before then, he's just another brute. He's taking what he can get, and he's just another brute, and he's used her and abused her.
Yeah.
The whole thing with him being a virgin, again, like I said, ridiculous. But again, it's that humanization. It's saying, as much as he wanted this, as much as he wanted her, not under those circumstances. And it's a really interesting parallel with his behaviour towards her as the... who was it? Was it Crassus? Who said, I will take Rome, but not... Basically refused to. Yeah. It's a really interesting parallel with that. They're both men of the same sort. They have a kind of understanding that you cannot take by force that which you love.
Yeah, because...
And if you do, you spoil it forever.
Yeah, I think, I think it was Caesar asks him about just sending in his, his legions into the city. And he's like, no, I won't do that.
Basically pull a Sulla.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is a really interesting parallel between these two characters. And really well drawn out. Because it's never explicitly stated with Spartacus. Whereas with Crassus, it's stated, and you almost still don't believe it.
Yeah.
And it's two sides of the same coin, which makes sense because Spartacus and Crassus is the big fight in this movie, if you like.
Yeah.
Or at least it is in Crassus's mind. So yeah.
And the film does a lot to... code Crassus as the worst Roman.
Given the way Crassus died, in real life, I mean, not in the film.
Yeah.
Given the way Crassus died, I can see why they got that idea of him. Don't Google it if you've got a weak stomach.
But yeah, basically,
Game of Thrones got the idea from Crassus.
With the Parthians paid an interesting tribute to his wealth.
Yeah.
For Game of Thrones fans who don't want to look it up, they gave him a golden crown.
Well, with Crassus, what they did, they literally down his throat and down his mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. realistically, he would have suffocated long before the internal burns killed him. But that's not a nice way to go. Which is really interesting. Crassus is not presented as badly as Roman propaganda would have it. Because most of Crassus's bad points are shifted onto the slave trainer.
Yeah.
Like most of the historical Crassus's bad points very much shifted onto the slave trader.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting choice. Especially considering the ending.
Yeah.
But yeah. My brain stopped. You go.
Okay. Anything else we want to talk about in Capua?
I want to hammer home. If you look at the scene with Spartacus and Varinia.
Yeah,
I think her name is Varinia. I don't pay attention to names in films like this. They annoy me.
Yeah.
It's very much shot in the style of Western romance. There's some really brilliant scenes where the shadow just happens to fall just right so you don't see her boobs, and the lighting is just on her eyes even though she's naked in the rest of the scene, and the camera angles are filmed to create intimacy. This very much borrows from that style of filming.
And funnily enough, despite a different cinematographer being listed, most of that's Kubrick.
Yeah.
It's ironic because the cinematographer that was listed in the credits wanted to be stricken from the credits because he felt like Kubrick wouldn't let him do his job.
Honestly, that's probably a good thing.
And did everything himself. The thing is, he then went on to, since he was the one listed in the credits as a cinematographer, he went on to get the Oscar for Best Cinematography.
So, yeah. I think that's it on Capua, unless you want to talk about the return to the training ground at this point, or you want to wait for the next bit to discuss that.
Though, I will say a bit, because the thing is, Capua is also, like, even though we don't actually see Gracchus until we leave Capua, Gracchus is also very much a presence.
Yeah.
In Capua.
Yeah. And that's kind of what this film does really well. Is really contextualize itself in the broader political sphere of Rome.
Yeah.
That it does really well. So I can't really argue with that.
Yeah.
Well, I could, but no one would listen because it would be ridiculous to argue with it.
Yeah. Well, if I were to guess, here's how, like, the assembly went. Basically, my guess is a lot of the context came from Kubrick because Kubrick likes getting his context right. A lot of the moralizing and Jewish undercurrents came from Douglas, and then Trumbo, slipped in communist stuff.
Yeah. It's very hard to make an anti-slavery film that's also anti-communist, but somehow this one managed it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an insult or like what.
I mean, Trumbo slipped in some pro-communist, anti-McCarthy stuff in where he could.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we will. Right. Then we get to Act 2.
Yes.
And depending on where you decide Act 2 starts, we see the slow realization throughout Act 2 that this isn't just a kerfuffle.
Yeah.
This isn't just a few slaves kicking off. This is big.
This is a movement.
Yeah. And let me just... Spartacus was 1960, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, kudos to Kubrick for being part of a film, however little control he had, that Americans really should have paid attention to in the decade after it was made.
Yeah.
We have this... What's the word I'm looking for? We have this... It's not a combination because it's more violent than that.
Conflict?
But it's not a conflict. We have this... We're shown both the microcosms of this movement. Spartacus going back to look for the body, which is the only reason he goes back.
Yeah.
Compared to everyone else really wanting revenge. We see this little family form of Spartacus, Verinia, and the pregnancy.
Yeah.
We see little friendships forming in the slave group, or the now freed slave group.
Yeah.
But that is all presented against this much broader backdrop of Spartacus making these big speeches and discussing really quite fantastical tactics. The idea of getting from where they were to the heel of the boot of Italy in 7 months and fighting their way across when they've got women and children.
Yeah.
When they've got, you know, we see in a lot of scenes, we see people playing slaves, we see, and I apologise if this is not the politically correct term, we see little people, we see people with visible injuries to limbs and to their eyes and things like that. Things that would discount them from being a military benefit.
Yeah. And
he takes them all.
Well...
And this is the very Jesus figure of, I'll take them all.
Well, okay. And I mean, Douglas is really hammering the point, you know, the point for this one, so I'm going to blame him for this comparison and say, well, Spartacus didn't have a pillar of fire giving him bad directions.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah. Now, there's an interesting bit of Americana in Spartacus's behaviour and the catalysing event. He goes back. Okay, so first of all in Capua we saw the guy who should have killed him.
Yeah.
His body desecrated.
Yeah, and left as an example.
I will say that it is not accidental that the way that body is hung and the way that's presented on screen is reminiscent of American lynchings. That's not an accident. That man becomes the symbol of all that is wrong with slavery.
Yeah.
And therefore, when Spartacus takes up arms against it, he's doing it on behalf of all slaves. It's got a little bit of a white saviour thing going on there. It's kind of gross, but I can see why Kirk Douglas, especially with the whole Jewish undercurrent, it might be a little bit more palatable. It might not. Take your pick. I'm not African American. It's not my place to comment on that.
Yeah.
Although I am mixed race and I find it kind of gross. So yeah. And then he goes back for the body, but the body's gone. He goes back for the body of slavery, he goes back for the remains of slavery, but it's gone. And in its place is an attempt to take revenge.
Yeah.
And it takes the white slave to tell the others, no, we mustn't sink to their level. Is anyone else picking up on these vibes here?
Yeah, where the other gladiators are trying to be the new boss, same as the old boss.
Yeah. And
Don't
think that
and then Sparta Jesus comes up and says, no, this isn't the way, we don't want to be as bad as the Romans.
Now, there's a couple of things about that. First of all, the civil rights movement in America was already a thing. It wasn't as big as it was going to get, but it was already very definitely a thing in the 60s.
Yeah.
And there was already this fear that there was a taste for revenge, especially amongst white people who, I don't know, just assumed that. They still do in some areas. It's really weird to me. Like, why want revenge? They just... Equality isn't revenge, you know.
Yeah.
It's a really weird mentality, and I don't get it. It's a really racist mentality as well. But this is almost...
It's a mentality as old as the triangle trade.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was...
Just because you'd want revenge doesn't mean that we're as bad as you. That's the entire point.
And that was only bolstered via Haiti being propagandized.
Yeah. So there, I find it really gross that Kirk Douglas is a white guy for this. Yeah. Because yes, he's Jewish, but he's also a white guy.
Yeah.
And especially because the catalytic event is the death of a black man.
Yeah.
If you want to read the American propaganda reading of this film, that's gonna, especially sort of in the era of, you know, critical race theory and other things looking at this film, that's gonna grind your gears. It grinds my gears. Although I am not as widely read as I'd like to be in order to explain why. So he goes back and he basically... He becomes... You can understand why white America liked Martin Luther King but didn't like Malcolm X. That's what's going on in this little scene. And yes, it would happen 10 years later. But that's really what's going on here. You've got the man who disavows violence except in self-defense.
Yeah.
And only wants freedom. That's all he wants and everything else. Then you've got the man who says, fuck, this is our lives. We deserve reparation. We deserve a fighting chance. And it is it's those two ideologies of the oppressed when rising up.
Yeah.
At odds here. And there's a lot of it in Jewish history. There's a lot of it in black history. Any oppressed minority you can ever imagine has to grapple with that moral question at some point in its uprising movement.
Yeah.
The problem is this film, unlike other Kubrick films, it doesn't so much spoon feed the answer as pies you in the face with it.
Which, once again, I'm gonna blame Douglas for.
I'm gonna blame Douglas. Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on. That needs to be a banner.
I'm gonna blame Douglas.
No, just blame Douglas.
Yeah. And it is... My understanding of Judaism is very... I was raised Catholic. Eek. My understanding is from a historical point of view. My understanding is that throughout history, whenever Jews have been oppressed or targeted or take your pick,
Yeah.
And it happens a lot. That's why they have so many holidays.
Yeah.
Because those holidays are markers that they survived an attempt to destroy them.
They tried to kill us. They failed, so we eat.
Basically, that's how my Jewish friend describes like 90% of their holidays.
Yeah.
I should say Jewish because she does like her prawns every so often.
Yeah.
But I say my Jewish friend as if I've only got one. One of my Jewish friends. My understanding is that if you like, their prime directive, Star Trek reference anyone, their prime directive in any situation like that is survival. Survival of the race. And I say the race in inverted commas, like survival of Judaism as a religion, survival of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Therefore, it makes sense to me that Spartacus's goal, especially if we're looking at this from a Jewish point of view, is survival, taking the women and the children, maintaining that mentality of having children even in these terrible circumstances.
Yeah.
And the goal is escape. That to me makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, it's also what actually was the goal for Spartacus. The goal for Spartacus was to get them to the sea and get them home.
Yeah.
That's where the historical accuracy of this film ends. But we'll get to that in part 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and of course, part 2 is also where we have the scene is also where Crassus gets Antonius as a gift.
Yeah.
I think from the governor of like Silesia, I think, or Sicily.
It depends on whether you listen to the words or watch watch the subtitles.
Yeah.
It's pronounced Silesia. The subtitles I had said Sicily.
Okay.
So, your guess is as good as mine. Some governor somewhere.
Yeah.
Someone looking to curry political favour. That's what that's about, basically. It doesn't really matter in the long run. He takes a liking to Antoninus. And it is quite obvious what he wants Antoninus for.
Yeah.
Like, he picks him out of a lineup without knowing anything about him. And we have this moment that is then paralleled by Spartacus of, what do you do?
Yeah.
I sing songs and I juggle and And again, this parallel between the two men Antoninus interacts with.
So this is also a way where Crassus is paralleled by Gracchus. Because so Gracchus has his harem of female body servants.
Yeah.
And Crassus takes Antoninus.
Yeah. So again, we're supposed to see that, and I will again emphasize that he's presented as having, and I'm going to say in quotes, homosexual tendencies.
Yeah.
In order to villainize him to the audience watching the film.
Yeah.
Not to his contemporaries within the text of the film.
Yeah.
That is very much designed to make him unlikable to a 1960s American audience.
Yeah. Basically,
that's all that's there for.
It's basically, look at how sleazy Gracchus is, and look at how Crassus is worse.
Yeah. Gracchus is a womanizer. He's a fat slob who can't get a woman unless she's enslaved to him, so he surrounds himself by them, doesn't bother getting married. He's the antithesis of the virtuous husband, or the virtuous Roman, or the virtuous American who has a family, 2.5 kids, and a car in the drive. He's the antithesis of that. But even worse than him look at the dirty queer. That's what's going on in that scene. That's what that's telling the audience.
Yeah.
And now I feel, ugh.
No,
I
sorry.
don't like that those words came out my mouth.
Yeah.
But that's what's going on there. And he picks Antoninus, who is beautiful. Who is objectively beautiful. He is everything a Roman man would look for in a male sexual partner.
Yeah.
He looks young for his age. He's 26, but he looks about 14, let's be honest. Until he gets out and he starts fighting with Spartacus, he looks about 14. Yeah. He's very nicely shaped. He's very nicely put together. And when he's clothed in Roman finery.
Yeah.
Like, it's very obvious when he shows up with the other slaves. He's in this, like, white tunic with...
Yeah, and, and lies about who his master was.
Yeah. And even in that scene, Spartacus looks at his clothes and goes, so what do you do? He knows. Yeah. He knows that there's only one kind of slave that gets dressed like that.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing about the oyster scene. And why it's structurally and what removing the oyster scene does to the movie.
It makes it a lot straighter.
Yeah, well, it also...
Just in general with Antoninus, it makes Antoninus a lot straighter.
So here's the thing. Now, see, here's how I read the Antoninus's plot as, with the oyster scene in.
Running away from being raped. That's what's going on in his plot.
Yeah, he ran to Spartacus because Crassus came onto him.
Yeah. That's exactly what's happening there with the oyster scene. Without the oyster scene, he still ran to Spartacus because of that, but it's a lot more subtle and it's a lot easier to miss. And I can see how without the oyster scene, it goes over the heads of a 1960s audience.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think the oyster scene ends with, by the oyster scene, I mean the cut bit.
Yeah.
Ends, if I were to guess, I'd say it ends before Crassus and Antoninus are on the balcony, and then and Antoninus makes a speech about serving Rome and loving her.
Yeah.
And
so for me, if I was going to cut that to get it past a straight audience, a homophobic audience, I would cut out everything from where he says, fetch my robe.
Yeah.
So we would see Antoninus put his robe on.
Yeah.
And then everything from there to where he steps onto the balcony and starts talking about loving and serving Rome.
Yeah.
That to me is what I imagine got cut out.
Yeah.
And at that point, it plays into a lot of things. The trope of the predatory gay.
Yeah.
This feeds right into that.
Yeah.
The fact that Antoninus looks so young and is not in a position to say no definitely feeds into the ideas of the pervert and all of that from the 60s. Yeah. That's what that's feeding into. I don't like it, but it does serve a plot purpose.
Yeah.
It's not just gratuitous homophobia for the sake of it. It does show a plot purpose.
Yeah.
There were other ways you could have made Crassus out to be a wanker without making him a predatory gay, but that's the easiest shorthand in the 60s. It's lazy. It is so easy, it's lazy. But it is absolutely, I can see why they did it that way in a context of a film about ancient Rome. But yeah, go on.
honestly, if I were to say redo this, I'd make Crassus. I'd actually pull from history and show a scene or two of Crassus's fire insurance.
Yeah. Again, folks, don't Google it unless you've got a strong stomach. But yeah. Or I would show Crassus accumulating wealth from being bribed and things like that.
Yeah.
I would show him fawning over Caesar. I would show him fawning over Gracchus to an extent.
Yeah.
I would. There's ways of presenting a character in ways that the Romans would have considered effeminate and therefore unvirtuous. There's a thing.
Though showing him fawning over Gracchus wouldn't really work if we kept the whole Gracchus is the man of the people, Crassus is the man of the elite theme.
Yeah. Although we do see a little bit of that between Crassus and Julius. And I'm going to call him Julius because guess what, folks? The whole Caesar thing, before he's made dictator, really? That's for the audience. That's so the audience know who he is. That's the only reason that's like that. But yeah.
Yeah.
Just filling my drink up. But yeah. The conversation between Crassus and Julius absolutely could have happened.
Yeah.
There probably were multiple conversations like that between Julius and other people at this stage in his career.
Yeah.
I would be very surprised if there were not conversations later between Brutus and someone else, with Julius as the person they're having a conversation about. And so it's really interesting to me that this is how they demonize Crassus. It definitely says way more about the audience, Kubrick, Douglas, and the other fella, name's gone, actually think they're pitching to. Because you've got to remember, American cinema does not challenge its audience. It just doesn't. Most cinema doesn't. If you ever see a film described as courageous, that means it's challenging a fundamentally held belief of the audience. That means that no one expects it to do well at the box office. They don't expect this film to be a financial success. So this film is being pitched, and nothing this film is saying, nothing this film is presenting, none of the moralising, none of that should be considered something that was dangerous to be said to the general public in 1960s America, because that was the audience it was being pitched at.
Yeah.
In the same way, the Marvel movies, there's nothing in the Marvel movies that is dangerous to say to an audience between 2010 and 2020 in American cinema goers in that era.
Yeah.
There's just nothing. The only Marvel movie that was ever called courageous was Black Panther. That tells you what they thought was dangerous to put on screen.
Yeah.
Possibly Wonder Woman as well. I think they called that courageous. That tells you what's dangerous to put on screen.
Though, I will say Wonder Woman isn't Marvel.
Okay, alright.
Yeah.
You can tell which of us is a comic book nerd, can't you?
So, anyways, though I actually, it wasn't, so I will say, it wasn't to Caesar. It wasn't to Julius. The the not like that line. It it was to Crassus's little puppet, because it was in the scene after he's like, "Yeah, I'll go kick Spartacus's ass for you," and Crassus is lambasting him for essentially giving over the garrison to Julius and thus to Gracchus.
Yeah. Can you tell that 1950s and 60s American actors look so alike? I've stopped caring.
Yeah. No, yeah.
This is what happens when you have one type of person you only put on screen.
Yeah, and yeah, Julius and the puppet guy have really look similar.
Yeah. The puppet guy who says, "I could raise 500 men." Shut up before you make a fool of yourself.
Yeah.
Which is a great moment between those two.
But, and, because, though that does start the subplot of Crassus just kind of, for those of you who have seen the Star Wars prequels, he starts kind of palpatining Julius away from Gracchus.
Yeah. I will also point out that Crassus's little what are we calling him? His minion.
Yeah.
There's a reason he looks a lot about Antoninus, and looks a lot like Antoninus on what's been insinuated about their relationship.
Yeah.
That's a client-patron relationship that is being insinuated to be in the Greek fashion.
No, I was saying...
Younger man who answers to an older man who takes his political education from him. That's why it's so shameful that Crassus...
No, I was saying he looks like Caesar.
No. He looks like Antoninus as well. If you look at them, they're very visually similar.
Yeah.
Basically saying Crassus has got a type.
Yeah.
And what's shameful when Crassus walks out of the Senate is not that he walked out of the Senate, which is the done thing. You know, when you fucked up, you take responsibility for that. What's shameful is that he's doing it for his little pretty boy.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes him effeminate in the Roman fashion. That's what makes him whipped. He's picked his pretty boy over his position in the Senate.
And
that's kind of what that's going for.
And also what's disgraceful to the American audience about that scene is he's just doing it for political points because he knows the Senate will come crawling back to him.
Yeah. But there is that undercurrent also of, again, the homophobia and there's a lot of that in Kubrick films. And there's one thing I will say, anyone who watches any Kubrick, don't go into it expecting progressive politics, because they're just not there. Kubrick, fantastic director, amazing mind, genius on that, but not politically progressive for his time in some ways, yes. Definitely an anti-war director, definitely had a view that certain things were not as they should be in American life. His films, I don't want to say that his films are a reflection of him, because they might not be. As I was saying when Ring disappeared for a moment, films say what the director thinks the audience wants to hear.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the majority of Kubrick's films were made in a time, all of his films really were made in a time where the safe bet when showing something to an American audience is to be homophobic.
Yeah.
When showing something to any Western audience is to be homophobic. So
Yeah.
just be aware of that. And in some cases to be blatantly racist, as we saw with Full Metal Jacket. So yeah, just be aware of that.
Yeah.
It's very much more a reflection, I think, of his audience than of Kubrick himself. I don't know enough about Kubrick to comment on what his politics would have been.
So,
The
and
fact
once
that
again,
he's making anti-war films in the same era as certain people are not, and are making the exact opposite of that, makes me think that a lot of his films are pitched very much more towards the audience than what he actually thinks in those aspects.
So, and once again, when it comes to the political message of messages of Spartacus, for the most part,
Yeah.
Because as we saw with both Full Metal Jacket and Doctor Strangelove, Kubrick is very much a make up your own mind kind of person.
Yeah. And this film is a big, big detraction from that.
Yeah.
I could understand if someone who really, if you wanted to create, let's say, a module of learning, like a semester of college or a selection of lessons about Kubrick's movies, if you wanted to, Kubrick on the big screen, a study of Kubrick, Kubrick movies in the 20th century, something like that.
Yeah.
I could very well understand not including this film in something like that. Because while it does show where Kubrick came from, I could understand maybe in the first lesson of a teaching thing like that, of saying, if you want to understand where Kubrick came from, watch this film.
Yeah.
And explaining that background, but I can understand why someone, maybe if they were designing it and they were short on time, and let's say they only had 6 lessons to do it all of Kubrick in, I can understand why this wouldn't be one of the films they would select to go in depth on.
Yeah.
Because Kubrick's hand in it is missing. Kubrick's hand in some really important ways is right there, in the cinematography, in the score, in the actual structure of the piece.
Yeah.
Is there. But in the actual nitty gritty of it, in the stuff that you can't cover in 3 PowerPoint slides and 5 bullet points.
Yeah.
Douglas is in the nitty gritty of this film.
Yeah.
Kubrick, not so much. That's my take. It's a bit of a hot take. I'll drink some tea while you're mulling that over.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of my understanding of it.
Well, and like I said, probably where we see it in the script itself is the fact that the context is so good.
Yeah. Again, but that's 1 bullet point on a PowerPoint. It's not an entire lecture.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Senate scenes are done really well. I will say this film actually struck me. There seems to have been. There was an era of biblical epics, classical epics, period dramas in leading up to the 60s, mid 60s, I would say.
Yeah, your era of, the 10 Commandments, Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor, Ben-Hur, Spartacus, all in this
that
movement.
era where the wardrobe was spot on.
Yeah.
You never see a zip, you never see something out of place. It looks right. Even when it's wrong, it fits the tone of the film in such a way that it feels right. It hits the spirit of it, even if it's not necessarily accurate.
Yeah.
And then you have the more modern era of period dramas where you try not to look too closely at the screen because you will see a zip up the back of her dress. And are those Adidas trainers he's wearing? And, it's just wrong. It's so wrong, it's ridiculous. And I'm talking specifically about American films. Those are what I call the HBO Max period dramas.
Yeah.
You see it in Game of Thrones. You see it in Reign, which is about Mary Queen of Scots. You see it in Versailles. You see, all those sort of modern period dramas, more serialized than movies. But you see it in some movies as well. You see it in the Borgias. You remember my rant about the Borgias.
Yeah.
Leather jacket with a zip. Yeah, all right, Cesare, calm down. It's the dress and the wardrobe is put to one side. These older films really get the tone right in the wardrobe. They really do. And I really noticed that in the Senate, because even down to the design of the togas. The togas are spot on for historical accuracy. They are spot on. I kind of... My one tiny, really pedantic little thing would be the shade is slightly off. The shade of purple around the edges. Because it looks more like, on my screen anyway, it looked more like burgundy than purple.
Well, and that could have been a Technicolor issue.
Yeah, that could be a Technicolor issue. And that's the thickness of the thing, the way the togas are placed, the way they move in the togas. They move very slowly and very sedately. It's very well done. And kudos to the wardrobe department for this movie.
And I have a plausible reason why.
Go on.
So back in that time, the biblical the ancient epics, the ancient epic films. Were the spectacle films of the day. Mm. And the spectacle of it was, you're seeing ancient Rome. You're seeing the Hebrews escaping Egypt, live on the big screen. Nowadays, period pieces, nowadays the big spectacle movies are your superhero movies, are your sci-fi movies, where the big spectacle is seeing the special effects.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, period pieces are dramas. And dramas don't get quite the budget that spectacle movies get, because they don't draw quite the crowd.
Yeah, that is entirely plausible, and I bet it's probably accurate as well. I've got no argument with what you just said there. That tracks for me.
Yeah.
The way the Senate is held as well, the way they speak, the whole thing is just very well done. It is very well done.
Yeah.
And I will say the sets in this film are fantastic.
Yeah.
The Roman houses and the way they're painted and coloured. They're quite clearly someone who designed this film has seen Herculaneum, has seen Pompeii.
Yeah.
It's very obvious. For anyone who's seen those archaeological sites, you look at this film and you think, yeah, someone realised that the colour spills. Most people who haven't been to those archaeological sites think of ancient Rome as white marble.
Yeah.
Because that's what they've been told for decades and decades and decades. And what's been pulled out the ground was white marble, and the Elgin marbles are white. and all of that. And the Parthenon's white, and you go to you see pictures of the Forum in ancient Rome, and all the stone's white. Well, of course it is. 2,000 years, the paint's gonna rub off.
Yeah.
But when you go to Pompeii, when you go to Herculaneum, and the thing that surprises a lot of people, and surprised me when I went to Pompeii, is the colour. And it's so vivid on the walls and on the floors and the ceilings of the buildings and the houses. There's one house I got told off in Pompeii. We walked into the villa, the big villa, and they took us into this room. And the walls were painted all in red. And they had like frescoes on the walls.
Yeah.
And there's one right as you walk in. And I looked at the wall. And it was this dark red colour. It was darker than my shirt. And the colours were so vivid, even after 2,000 years, that I physically couldn't stop myself reaching out to touch them. Even though we'd been told don't touch because you'll ruin it. I physically couldn't stop myself reaching. I was mesmerised at the different colours, the blacks and the creams and the blues. The blues were so vivid, and the greens. And I reached out, and literally a security came up to me and grabbed my arm and yanked my arm down as I went to touch the wall, because I was just totally transfixed. These sets are like that. They're very bright. They're very opulent. There's one outdoor set with the pool and the outdoor pool.
Yeah.
I looked at that and it was so bright. And it was like the camera had been changed as well to make it look brighter and almost cartoonish.
Yeah.
And I thought, the only place I can imagine being that cartoonishly bright is somewhere like a casino or something. I thought, did they film that outside Caesar's Palace in Vegas? Because that's the only place you're going to get something that looks like that in real life. But in that sense, it is almost true to what the Roman world would have looked like. Yeah. The Roman world was a very colourful, very bustling world. It wasn't medieval Europe of dark, dank and everything faded. It was this really bright, and this film really gets that right. The beautiful lingering shots of the Italian countryside. You know, the clothes, the sets. There's a lot of colour in this film. Yeah. And the cinematography really takes advantage of it.
Yeah.
So I can see why it got the Oscar.
Yeah.
I really can see that.
Also, fun fact. This is the only Kubrick film where an actor got an Oscar.
Yeah, that tracks.
Peter Ustinov got Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, that tracks.
But that being said, Peter Sellers was nominated.
Has Peter Sellers ever not been nominated? Just as a...
Always the nominee, never the winner.
Yeah. But that many nominations, to his credit, is a real achievement.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to talk about the sets and have my fangirl moment. Because,
so, anything else we want to cover from the second act?
The second act, I would say, it is accurate that Spartacus pitched up on the foot of Vesuvius. That's a historical fact. How quickly he managed to train the slave army is kind of finagled. Most of the people who actually rebelled with Spartacus historically were former soldiers or were well-trained gladiators.
Yeah.
It is absolutely ridiculous, and it is commented on. It is madness to think you could train an army of 10,000 people to fight in fit. because men and women shown in that fighting in 7 months. And not just in less than that, if you think about it, because they've been travelling for 7 months.
Yeah.
And they've been winning battles along the way.
Yeah.
So that's very...
Yeah, sacking town or raiding towns and to collect the rest of the payment for the Silesian pirates.
No, you had it right the first time, sacking towns.
Yeah, sacking towns.
There is one scene in a town where they've got one guy, he pours out his jug, he throws his jug down, he goes to walk away, and this random woman comes out of nowhere and smacks him one and beats him to the ground. And Spartacus's people pull her off.
Yeah.
And that's that same freedom versus revenge thing going on there.
Well, yeah, because... So... Yeah, because the thing is, Julius, says he'll face Spartacus at, the town. Then we cut to a title card of the town's name, and we have that scene.
Yeah, where they're returning in triumph.
Yeah.
And it is designed to look like a triumph. People throwing flowers from the window. Yeah. You should be, as an American, you should be thinking about the Macy's parade and, the return of of winning football teams and things. That's what you should be comparing that to. For those of us who aren't American, compare it to your local football, and I mean football, actual football team, coming home after a big win.
Yeah.
It is these big parades. And man, woman, child, old woman, young woman, all of them coming into this riotous fanfare. They are welcome there. And that's an interesting point that has no basis whatsoever in historical fact.
Yeah.
They were not the Robin Hood characters. Historically, everyone in the Roman Empire was shit scared of Spartacus and didn't want him anywhere near them.
Yeah.
They did not want this to happen. Spartacus was... There's not really anything I can compare it to. They were terrified of him. There was a time in Rome where if you were heard to say Spartacus's name too loudly in the streets, you would be flogged.
Like, probably the closest I could say, like, in terms of perception, in terms of contemporary perception, probably the best modern equivalent would be to say that Spartacus was the Bin Laden of his day.
Okay, you know how the Taliban took Kabul? And the world looked on in horror.
Yeah.
But there will have been a tiny minority who genuinely believed they would be okay there and that they should be there and all this, that and the other, and would have maybe applauded them as they arrived.
Yeah.
It's that situation.
Yeah.
Spartacus was, to the Romans at least, and from a Roman point of view, a terrorist. That's what he was. There's no sugarcoating that. People like to present him as this freedom fighter. He wasn't that either. When you actually know the history, he wasn't. It was all pure personal gain, self-interest, as most historical figures are.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that.
So
sorry to burst your bubble if you were a fan.
Yeah. So because here, so anything else we want to bring up about the second act, because I have a good because I want to talk about the transition from the second to the third act.
You mean the moment where he looks out on the 5,000?
Yeah.
He's at the top of the hill and he looks out on them.
Well, and the scene with Verinia that that reads, that can read two different ways. The tell my story scene.
Ah, yeah. There's also, I want to talk about Antoninus again, but in the context of Spartacus. But we'll do the Verinia first.
So one, you can look at it through the Jewish lens of tell my story, keep the culture going.
Yeah.
However, through the American propaganda lens is tell this story of Spartacus, this story that props up the American ideal and shows how great America is because it's better than degenerate Rome.
Yeah. There's an argument for that, certainly.
Yeah.
Do I think you should probably warm up before stretching quite that far to make it McCarthyism? Yes, because I don't want you to pull any muscles. But there is certainly an argument for it. And it's not quite that bad a stretch that you will pull a muscle if you don't warm up.
Basically...
It's there, but there are other readings that would probably...
Yeah, like I said,
better, but it is
like
there.
the Jewish reading is probably more likely.
Yeah, and the general American mentality is probably more likely. The whole telling of what we dreamed of.
Yeah.
Is very kind of manifest destiny. There's a lot of that in there. Yeah. There's a lot of kind of, it came later, but again, Kubrick has this habit of sometimes putting things into films that life imitates later on.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a tell them about the dream, it's a bit of that going on, which is these people are going to go to church, and it's the same thing that's going on there. Although again, that came later, so probably no relation. It's definitely an interesting concept. And it does actually feed into what I want to talk about Antoninus. This idea of the bard. Antoninus is a bard.
Yeah.
And the one thing I do like about this, again, the accuracy. Singer of songs in ancient Rome was not music. It might have been, but it's more likely to be something like we see with Antoninus, where a poet giving a recital. The Roman word is the kame, the songs of the poet. The kame of, I think I'm pronouncing that right, the kame of Catullus is very, it's song number, verse number. It's very much, it's the music of the poet. So that's really nice. The little comic relief moment with the egg is quite funny.
Yeah. Where Kirk Douglas literally gets egg on his face.
Yeah. And again, that's designed to humanize Spartacus, because he's getting a bit big for his britches at this point. He's this big, powerful general who can take on any city, and he's looted people, and he's let his people treat the Roman people like garbage, and he's leading these people to an almost certain death, and everyone knows it but him, apparently. And so we have to humanize him, and that's what this moment's for. It also is just quite sweet between him and her. And Antoninus is very much, he's set up for that. But his relationship with Spartacus is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I feel like, because we're getting on to the third act, I'm going to say this now, but his relationship with Antoninus is his valet, if you notice. Antoninus is his right hand.
Yeah.
Reads his mail for him because he can't read.
Yeah.
He's always there next to him. basically doing the same job he was doing in Crassus's household.
Yeah.
And there is potentially a reading, and let me finish this before you jump on me, because I know you'll want to. There is potentially a reading that it's very much like the Crassus household.
Yeah.
And I think the writer of this script and the director realised that, because the final scene in the third act between the two of them makes a point of really, and it's really clunky dialogue, and it's really just, it obviously was written in a hurry, and it's just badly done to make sure that there's no insinuation of that whatsoever, and it's a father-son relationship, and that's how they love each other. What straight audiences won't realise is that, especially in the, before, it was quite common when homosexual couples for one to adopt the other so they had family rights and so they could buy property and things. So it doesn't... when you see someone having a gay panic and they don't realise that every word they've written actually belies their own point, that's what's going on there, and it's just funny to me, because they were quite, oh shit, we have to make them straight, how do we do that? I know, let's have them call each other father and son, oh shit, they're too gay, we need to fix this, and then quite clearly don't know the LGBT history that makes that just even funnier, looking at it just, I just found that quite fun and funny, and it is very much, oh, I love him like a father, I love him like a son. Yeah, that's what we used to say when it was illegal to say we loved each other, loved each other.
Yeah. and so, I mean, there can be jokes about being penetrated by a Thracian knife.
Did you have to say that while I was taking a drink?
I didn't notice that you were taking a drink. I'm sorry.
There are always jokes about being penetrated by a Thracian knife. Just, yeah. But yeah, on to Act 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so he does his, he has his Dark Night of the Soul.
Yeah.
This is what I call it, where he's walking through the camp, and they all look up at him with adoring faces, and he's realising the responsibility he's taken on.
And we do have a little bit of Israeli Manifest Destiny, where he sees the little girl with the mother and, asking, Mommy, when do we get to go home?
You can certainly take it that way. And I'm glad you used those specific words and not the words that popped into my head seeing it, because those words will definitely get this stream stopped, so I'm not going to say them.
Yeah.
It starts with a Z.
Yes.
Ends in ist.
Blame Douglas.
And it's a really... It's Moses parting the Red Sea, but the Red Sea is the people. And it's Jesus preaching to the crowd atop the hill. And it's all of that messianic... There's 2,000 years of messianic archetype going on there. And there's just so much of it, and it's so cheesy it stinks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just found it really cheesy.
Though,
I always find it cheesy in films. It annoys me. Like, find another way to make your protagonist interesting. Don't make him Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus has been done.
But, well, okay, so there, is there anything we really want to say about Spartacus learning that he's been betrayed by the Silesians?
I want to talk about the Silesian ambassador, just in general.
Yeah.
This guy is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
We've got a visual image that he's meant to look Arabic, Persian.
Yeah.
That kind of area. Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
That's what he's meant to look. He's meant to look foreign in a group, in a place where everyone's foreign.
Yeah.
There's this obvious, again, I feel like everyone in this movie is made to be motivated by money but Spartacus.
Yeah.
Which I wonder if that's not Kirk Douglas sticking two fingers up at 2,000 years of stereotypes about Jews.
Yeah, it could be.
Which, honestly, valid.
Yeah.
It's valid. I'm not even going to argue with that. Valid. And he has this conversation with Spartacus about the crystal. If you looked into a crystal, as I believe you are now,
yeah,
knowing that all these people are going to die, would you have still done it? And this is where you have the elevation of this film, the elevation of Spartacus's motivation.
Yeah.
This is where it becomes very American.
Yeah, where he says, all men die, free or slave, but when a free man dies, he loses his life. When a slave dies, he's set free.
Yeah. And that's there's a lot of Americanness in that.
Yeah.
But there's also the whole freedom versus slavery. You can't imagine him giving that speech in front of an American flag like this. You can just see it. It is very, planes flying overhead and fireworks, and it's a 4th of July speech, is that one.
Yeah.
But this elevates his motivation.
Yeah.
And then immediately brings it crashing back down to earth and reality. With the battle.
Yeah.
The battle is... And if you notice in this film, up until that battle, we've not seen any large battles. We've seen the aftermath of them.
Okay.
And we've seen a couple of gladiatorial contests, but there's not been a lot of fighting.
So before we get to the battle, I want to touch on the speech scene.
The speech, then also the let's pile on the tragedy moment with Vernier in the...
Well, no, like specifically how the parallel speeches between Spartacus and Crassus.
That is very deliberate.
Yeah.
It's very obvious because it literally cuts between them.
Yeah.
And it's your... You know how in boxing they do the thing where the two boxers will shit-talk each other before a match?
Yeah.
That's basically what's going on there.
But this is where we get some, Trumbo's communism, pro-communism slipped in. Because, Spartacus talking about how the rich, how the rich Romans are, languishing in their wealth with no regards for the workers and slaves.
Yeah.
And I did mean to say workers because the word workers was put in Spartacus's mouth.
Yes. Very deliberately so.
Yes.
And this is where your Red Scare reading really comes into its own.
Yeah.
Up until this point in the film, all the points where you've pointed out and gone, that's anti-communist, you could and ah.
Yeah.
this is the moment where all of that solidifies.
Yeah.
And he's that messianic figure. And look, anyone out there who thinks the messianic figure that he's obviously been made to emulate, Jesus,
Yeah.
would have been a capitalist is deluding themselves.
Yeah.
We're talking about a man who trashed a temple because they were selling wares in there. We're talking about a man who broke rules about the Sabbath to eat, and pointedly said the Sabbath is for the service of man, not for.
And, sell all you have, give the money to the poor.
Yeah.
It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle.
Yeah, Jesus was a socialist, deal with it.
Yeah.
I'd go so far as to say he was a communist, but it strikes me as a bit more intelligent than that.
Yeah.
But that's my own personal politics kicking in. Nobody at me.
Yeah.
Communism's a bit pie in the sky for me.
And the early, and the early church, at least as portrayed in Acts, was very socialistic, perhaps even communistic.
There's a reason Christianity took off amongst the slave classes of Rome.
Yeah.
Because it preached equality, and it preached, rest, and it preached looking out for each other and peer support and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
That's why it appealed. That's why it gained such a massive following amongst women and slaves in ancient Rome. That's why it appealed to the outcasts.
And specifically early in the book of Acts, Ananias and Sapphira got smote, not for, for basically being too stingy when everybody else was, selling all they had and giving the money to the communal, church. They only sold part of it, acted like they sold everything, and then got smoked for lying.
Yeah, it's the widow's mite, isn't it?
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know that story, I think it's in Mark. It may also appear in John. Jesus points out a widow in the temple giving like twopence, and says she's giving more than that rich man over there who's just emptied a sack of gold in. And the reason for it is because she's giving all she has, he's giving a fraction thereof. It's not a subtle thing. You didn't expect subtlety from Christianity, did you?
Yeah.
Really? So yeah, that's kind of all of this is feeding in. It's an interesting take on the back of McCarthyism, which is the 50s.
Yeah.
To put something like that in a film in 1960. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, and like this and Exodus were the first like two movies in like nearly a decade where Trumbo actually had a credit under his actual name because he had been blacklisted.
Yeah. And there is definitely, you can see why.
Yeah.
Given the socialist leanings of this film, quite surprised it got the Oscar nomination.
Yeah. Our favorite cowboy tried to get people to boycott it.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Mr. John Green Berets Wayne.
Yeah. Mr. John offered to make a propaganda movie for the government out of his own pocket. Green Berets Wayne.
But a different John actually cemented the end of the blacklist by watching a screening of it.
Yeah.
But he didn't have a very good weekend in Dallas afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shame,
Well,
really.
a few years afterwards.
Yeah. That amongst, and the fact that he actually listened to his big brother.
Yeah.
I've said it, I'm sure I've said it before, and I will say it again, folks. Bobby Kennedy, the greatest president America never had.
Yeah.
That man would have, yeah. Bobby Kennedy and Bernie Sanders, that'd be a hell of a team, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So,
Anyway,
so
I'm
the
going off
battle.
topic. Back to the battle. It's epic. It's
Yeah.
big. I love the wide shots, and we see
Yeah.
the Roman movements.
Yeah.
And then
So
it cuts to Spartacus, who, what the
Yeah.
obviously he had intelligence about what he thought they were going to do, and he's been undercut because they changed it at the last minute.
Yeah, because Crassus is like, let's shuffle up the plans.
Yeah. Very, very well done. Very well filmed. And then
Though
this
I will now all throughout this stream, Noodle has had their little niggling nitpicks. Now it's time for Ring to have a little niggling nitpick. It's a lot less easy to see when the camera's pulled back, but when you get some of the close-up shots on the formations,
yeah,
the soldiers are obviously out of step.
Yeah. Listen, you can't have Ali Emery on every film set making sure they're right.
Yeah.
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 That's yeah.
Yeah.
It is what it is. No, Kubrick got it right in later films.
Yeah.
I imagine that's probably one of those little things that kept Kubrick up at night, like, damn, I'm going to make sure I do it right in another film. And then he did Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
It's a very... I mean, I got flashes of Braveheart watching it. It's very much the common man versus the might of the empire.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean kind of by American propaganda. Dear Rome, Spartacus's people were a guerrilla force.
Yeah.
There was no fucking way you were beating them, except in that one specific way in which they engaged in open battle, which no competent guerrilla general would ever do.
Yeah.
Because they know they've lost. There is no way a competent general of a guerrilla force tries to go head to head with the might of a standing army. Doesn't work. That's not where the strength of a guerrilla force lies.
Yeah.
You won the battle. America may win battles but lose wars, and this is saying this is how you win the war, by going into battle. There's an interesting way it's done where Spartacus's tactics appear to be create chaos.
Yeah.
That's why we have the rolling fire, and we have it's just chaos. And it's filmed like chaos. The Romans are very regimented and we didn't have a testudo. We didn't.
Well, to be fair, the testudos was best against archers, and Spartacus didn't have archers in that scene.
Exactly. So we can see why it's not there. Someone who actually understands Roman tactics clearly put that battle together from their point of view.
Yeah.
Although I will say, why did you move your flanks in rather than out and flank them? What was going on there?
Well, because remember, Crassus
is
Crassus,
expecting backup from behind, yeah.
yeah,
Which is the only point bringing your people in so they don't flank the enemy makes any sense, is when you're expecting them to be attacked from behind.
Yeah.
And then we have the battle, and then we have this wide, long shot. Well, it's not wide, it's actually quite narrow, but this long shot of the entire battlefield essentially becoming an open grave.
Yeah.
I will put money on Kirk Douglas had something to say about how that was filmed.
Yeah.
That narrow gully of bodies.
Yeah.
So it initially looks like you're looking down into an open grave.
Yeah.
And then opens up and it's there. Go and watch any movie about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And there will be a shot like that in it.
Though I think, honestly, I think this is probably something Kirk Douglas and Kubrick were on the same page on.
Yeah, probably on the same page, but yeah. I can see the hand of anyone who's trying to look at Jewish history there.
Well,
and
it's
one of Spielberg's favourites as well. If you look at his movies, it's one of his favourite shots.
Because here's the thing. Originally, the battle was going to be interspersed with scenes of Varinia giving birth.
I'm glad they cut that out.
Yeah.
Because that would have been... it would have dragged the battle scene on way too long.
And that's why they cut it.
Yeah. And it would have been a sensory overload.
Yeah.
That battle was already chaotic and vivid and really sensory overload without cutting away to a screaming woman.
Yeah. Basically,
and I think it has more of an impact of them finding her, covering the baby, has more of an impact because we haven't seen her give birth.
Well, yeah, like the first we get is we hear a baby crying as it's panning over all the dead bodies.
Yeah. And this is something cinema likes to do a lot, juxtapose death and life.
Yeah.
It's the circle of life, folks.
And it moves us all.
Yeah. I'm not going to sing. You're not going to make me sing. I haven't been drinking. I'm not ready to sing.
Yeah.
Mainly because I can't, but yeah. And then we have this. She tells them she saw Spartacus die.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting how, despite the fact that they don't get the chance to confer, everyone is on the same page. The Romans cannot be allowed to know they've captured Spartacus.
Yeah. Well, ironic, and of course, before the battle, Crassus has Batiatus in the camp. Batiatus is like, hey, you have something, I have something you want. All I want is to handle the sale of the survivors.
Yeah. Now, we know looking at this film that there weren't going to be any survivors, so that's just hilarious. But there's also Crassus. There's this thing we see where Crassus finds out that he's actually seen Spartacus but can't remember him.
Yeah.
And it's a really clever way of pointing out how, no matter how important you are, no matter how many followers you amass or anything else like that, you are sometimes just a footnote in someone else's story.
Yeah.
And they're not going to recognise your face. And the fact that Crassus doesn't remember him is a really, really... I love it. Because imagine, how many people walked past any given famous person before they were famous
Yeah.
and then say, I don't know the face. I've
Also,
done it. When famous people have died, I've gone, and I've had to Google them to remember them.
yeah.
And everyone does it, and it's a really, really clever commentary on how human beings respond to people.
And also, any kind of sloppier or lazier, screenwriter would have slipped into the trope of, oh,
that guy. But
yeah,
this is the point. Spartacus was so below Crassus's notice that he doesn't remember him. And then and yet Crassus has spent the majority of this film ruminating on the guy and hyperfixating on him, never realizing that he's actually seen him.
Yeah. Which is almost Shakespearean.
Yeah. There's an element of tragedy to that.
Also, it's like it's kind of in character and telling how Batiatus compliments on Crassus's killing technique.
Yeah. Batiatus is a scavenger. He is really not a good person. He has no redeeming qualities whatsoever at this point in the film.
Yeah. But I mean, leave it to someone who runs a gladiator school to use technique as a compliment.
Yeah, and I will say as well, you can see how this film really, really, really had an impact on Gladiator. Yeah. The trainer is the same, the gladiators are the same. A lot of it is almost, from a character point of view as well, the archetypes are the same.
Yeah. So are you saying Gladiator is a better Spartacus?
I'm saying they're both terrible, but I'd prefer Spartacus because it was the original.
And so, after the battle, Crassus picks up Verinia and is smitten with her, as he was back in Capua before she escaped. And we come to the most famous scene from the movie, the movie that, or the reason that this movie is remembered, where Crassus comes to the surviving slaves, and he makes them an offer that can refuse. He comes up and he's like, hey, if you give me Spartacus, or point out his body, I will, only Spartacus will be crucified, and the rest of you will be, sold off to live your lives. And of course, we see Spartacus thinking over it and getting ready to sacrifice himself for the rest of the slaves, because crucifixion is not a death that you want on anyone. Even a demigod who's who's giving up his weekend for the sins of the world. and he's about to, you know, he's about to give himself away. But Antonidas stands up and says, I am Spartacus. And like one by one and more, each slave stands up and announces that no, they are Spartacus. And like all of them except for Spartacus himself, and we get this close up on his face, and we see a single tear, roll down his eye because he realizes how much how much his people care for him, essentially. That they are willing to die in a horrifically torturous way, in a literally excruciating manner, for him and the cause that he, that he perpetuated. And of course, this is also where we get into a little bit of yeah. I am Groot.
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus, and so's my wife.
Yeah.
And this scene, yeah. The one perfect tear, the one, the cracking of the waterworks is always the poignant moment in a film.
Yeah.
It's famous for that reason. It's also, I think it's more famous for being parodied than anything else.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Well, I mean, so the thing is, it's famous for being parodied, but it was parodied because it was famous.
Yeah.
It's like the monolith scene.
Yeah. It was famous, but then there will be an entire generation that only knows of it through the parody.
Yeah.
I think there's an argument to say that the film could have ended there.
Yeah.
But I'm glad it didn't.
Yeah.
Because this film did something that's actually quite rare. And it finished Verinia's story off. It finished off the female character's story.
Well, it also, if it ended there, if the film ended there, like, because the last, like, half hour of the movie is finishing all the major players off.
Yeah. Verinia's story, I'm glad it got so much screen time, and she is really very well acted and very well presented in this last half hour.
Yeah.
She's obviously an intelligent woman. She's a survivor.
So, well, oh, okay, you're back.
Yeah.
You froze for a second.
Yeah, so she's, this whole thing where he realizes that she doesn't like the opulence and the riches.
Yeah.
And lets her go.
He doesn't let her go.
Do you really think she got out of that house with a baby without being seen?
Remember, Gracchus hired Batiatus to sneak her out.
Yeah, even still, there's.
Well, also remember he was off having his Spartacus took my girl and Spartacus took my guy hissy fit while he watched Spartacus and Antonidas kill each other over who actually gets to get the quick death.
Yeah. But I still think there's an element there of him having other priorities than keeping her there. Once he realises she doesn't really want to be there and she never will. There is a great line that he does deliver though when he says, "I bought a wet nurse. I hope the milk doesn't harm his stomach," and she says, "I sent her away. I want to yeah."
Yeah.
And the line he delivers of, "Well, I'm not sure I approve," or whatever it is he says.
Yeah.
Very Roman, very upper class. It was not the done thing.
Yeah.
It almost it almost makes him a madman because he's treating this slave like his wife.
Yeah.
And with all the thing, and even dresses her in a stola. And he specifically says the word stola, although what she's wearing is not actually a stola. Because the stola was the female equivalent to the toga, which only citizens of Rome were allowed to wear.
Aha.
He's basically dressing her up as his wife.
So, I'm not sure. So I apologize if this comparison is in bad taste.
Go on.
But essentially in Roman terms, he's damn near pulling a Caligula.
Well, considering Caligula was Roman.
Yeah. Well, you know what I mean. The whole with the senatorial pick Caligula made.
Yeah, but that was in that.
Yeah.
That's really misunderstood. Caligula had a sense of humor, folks. He was doing it to point out the ridiculousness of the Senate.
So basically, Caligula was trolling.
Yeah.
Or rather, I think Nero also had a thing with a horse. Or was that just propaganda?
Phrasing. Probably propaganda.
Yeah. Also in terms of Crassus, I'm pretty sure Crassus had a Spartacus pegged when he recognized Antoninus.
Yeah. Because he saw Antoninus look at Spartacus.
Yeah. And he also probably saw the glares, the daggers being stared at him from Spartacus.
Yeah.
But obviously he realized that killing Spartacus wouldn't be enough. He had to kill the idea of Spartacus. And so he had to kill all of them.
Yeah. And that is very much the historical approach. That's what happened. They had to kill the idea of Spartacus.
Yeah.
Because the idea of Spartacus, when you think about what he represents to the Roman people, he really is the terrorist of his day in their minds.
Yeah.
He represents the overturning of everything they hold dear. And he is not. And they have to. That's why he was killed so viciously, so violently. That's why the line is in there of burn the body and scatter the ashes in secret.
Yeah.
That's what we do to people we don't want making martyrs of. You do not give a martyr somewhere for people to meet up.
Yeah.
There's also damnatio memoratum. I can't remember the Latin declension, don't at me. But removing him from all memory is the idea. And of course,
the final, the final the final matched pair in a in a sim in a in a mirroring of the first matched pair. It is once again Crassus's final descent into just pettiness.
Yeah. And it's very telling that they're both fighting to kill. And there's an interesting commentary on when is it right to kill, and euthanasia and mercy killings. There's a lot of that going on with this.
Yeah.
Antoninus, it's probably best that it went the way it did.
Yeah.
Because Antoninus, for all of the training he had with Spartacus, for all of his loyalty, would not have withstood a crucifixion.
Yeah.
That would have been, he'd have died screaming.
Yeah.
He'd have died, he would not have had the honourable death he needed. And it's really important that Antoninus gets an honourable death. Because he has been the victim of the predator throughout this. And it's really important that in his final moments he's given that masculinity.
Yeah.
He's given that quick, honourable death in his father's arms. But the fact that he was fighting for right and fighting because he was trying to do the right thing and he went down swinging. Yeah. It's really important that that character gets that moment because for the most part he's been the victim of the homophobia of this movie.
Yeah. And I have a terrible comment, that could be made about how Antoninus gains his masculinity, but I'll leave that to your imagination.
Yes, from the penetration of his body by an older man. Yeah.
No, so by getting penetrated by the Thracian knife of his daddy.
You had to say daddy, didn't you? You had to put... Yes, that's... Yes. You said it blatantly, whereas I've been hinting at it the whole stream. Thank you. Yeah. But yes, there is a... You can read it that way. Yeah. That's kind of... Yeah. Like I said, it's really clunky, it's really badly done, and it's terribly acted.
Yeah.
These two characters have spoken maybe twice this whole movie. Now you want me to believe they're like father and son?
Yeah.
It's just, it doesn't track. But it happens. Spartacus gets put up on a plank. And then we have... What happens after that, I like to think of as the epilogue of this movie.
Yeah.
Because it's the final wrapping up of the ideological story.
Yeah.
That the ideology will live on. It's, again, the woman carrying the story of the crucified Messiah.
Yeah.
To those who would pass it on. Now, where have I heard that before?
Yeah.
It's
I'm Jesus.
I'm Jesus. It's very, very telling. But there is one part of it that is gut-wrenching. Utterly gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
So they ride out of the city. They get stopped by the guards.
So, okay. let's rewind a bit, because there is, like, in this, in this epilogue. So we watch the glorious republic begin to take its final death spiral into dictatorship.
Yeah.
Where Crassus takes Gracchus into a midnight meeting of the Senate. And during this, Gracchus has this line about, lists of traitors, and my name is on top, no doubt.
Yeah.
It's highly, it's pretty much consensus that was Trumbo taking a shot at McCarthy and the blacklist.
Yeah. It's also, you've got the beginnings of the first triumvirate there.
Yeah.
Julius, Crassus, and Gracchus in the same room.
And no, the first triumvirate was Julius, Crassus, and Pompey.
There's one where Gracchus was involved. Is that the second triumvirate?
And no, because remember, or at least in the movie, this may be a historical inaccuracy, but well, actually, because I think the second triumvirate was after Julius's death. It was like Mark Antony, Octavian, and someone else.
Yeah, I think that was a Gracchus, wasn't it? Is that who I'm... Yeah.
But...
Listen, I may be a historian, but we're not trained to memorize dates and shit. We're trained to think, not to memorize.
Yeah. But anyways, Gracchus, learns that the reason Crassus isn't just executing him is because he wants to use him as a mouthpiece.
Yeah.
So Gracchus arranges his final fuck you to Crassus by having Verinia kidnapped and arranging for her and Batiatus to go to Aquitaine.
Yeah. And there is the very unsubtle, oh, it's a pretty knife.
Yeah, and he goes, and he takes his knife after telling Batiatus he's going down a different path. He takes his knife and he goes to the bath.
Yeah.
And that's the last we see of Gracchus.
Yeah. And then they ride out, the horse and cart, get stopped by the soldier to check their papers, and Batiatus?
Yeah, Batiatus
is noticeably shaky.
Yeah.
He's worried. Because he knows anyhow she's pegged for who she is, they ain't leaving that spot alive.
Yeah, and he and he introduces her as his sister-in-law.
Yeah. And she spots Spartacus up on the plank.
Yeah.
And goes up to him. And this scene, this is a hell of a scene.
Yeah.
She shows him the kid, which immediately belies the attempt to keep him from his wife and child by his enemy. She tells him his child will be raised knowing of him and his dream, which immediately belies the destruction of the memory of Spartacus.
And of course, also leads into the propaganda reading.
Yeah. And the keep the bloodline at all costs and survival and all of that we've talked about reading.
Yeah.
And then, so we have these two very hopeful comments that are made in very quick succession. Look at your son, isn't he, and he's free, Spartacus, your son is free.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if she's giving him permission to die peacefully by saying, you got what you wanted, your son is free.
And she starts crying and begging him to die.
Yeah. She wants him to die in that moment when all's well, as far as he can be. And he just doesn't die. You would think at that moment, cinema law says, or artistic law says, that he sees that there is a new dawn on the horizon, a future for his family, he can die at peace, so he's going to go. The fact that he doesn't is a real kicker. Because it utterly belies everything. It says that, okay, your son survived, your wife survived, your memory's not going to die. You can go in peace now. And he says, but you've still got to suffer first.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm going to disagree. It's the opening monologue come full circle.
And I see where you're going with it, but the fact that he doesn't die right there while she's there.
Yeah. Yes, it is a subversion of the trope. But I think it fits more thematically as the opening monologue coming full circle.
Yeah, it fits the theme of the messianic figure not dying and all that.
Well, and of course, he doesn't get to, he doesn't get to die happy because his mission isn't completed, because slavery won't that institution that won't end for another 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Spartacus gets a bittersweet ending, not a happy ending, because slavery is still around because of the horrible, of the tyrannical pagan Romans.
See, that's the thing.
Yeah.
If you actually believe that Spartacus's motivation was the end of slavery, your reading follows. If you've looked at this film and seen it as this is just one man's desperate bid for freedom that got out of hand, and one man's obsession with a woman that drove him to lose his and snap.
Basically, if I read it in the way the propaganda wants me to read it,
it's coming full circle. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you read it as you see the propaganda and you want to look at it elsewhere, you see that this moment is the ultimate tragedy.
Yeah.
And that's something that happens in a lot of propaganda. If you take propaganda as is, it's a bittersweet ending, but it leaves you with an almost religious serenity, insofar as it leaves you with a moral warmth.
Yeah.
But if you see propaganda for what it is, you see the tragedy of the story that you're being told.
Yeah.
And you see it almost becomes a satire of itself, insofar as it's showing you that tragedy. It's showing you the difference between the real and the ideal.
Yeah.
The idea that anyone could, with a straight face in 1960, talk about slavery being over and racism being over is even more ridiculous than it is today.
Yeah.
It's a very... The whole film is obviously very white, paternalistic, very sort of white man's burden thing going on. And to me, ending on that note, look, I don't like it when white people make martyrs out of themselves in the racism discussion.
Yeah.
No, you're either an ally or you're not. But don't make a martyr out of yourself and don't talk over other people. And that kind of feels like what the film's doing to me. Again, I'm watching it 60 years after it came out.
Yeah.
But it leaves a nasty taste in my mouth. And it very much is of its time in that sense.
Yeah.
It had to make the white American cinema going audience feel good about themselves. And that's quite obviously what it was intended for.
And once again, Kubrick despised the blatant moralizing of Spartacus, and that's what actually prompted him to direct all of his other movies with an iron grip on everything, including the script.
Yeah. And we got a canon of work that is largely unmatched.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can't argue with that. Listen, if this is going to be the worst movie a man ever made, if this is going to be what triggered the career of Kubrick, it's not a bad starting point.
Yeah.
It could have certainly done a lot worse. It could have been a lot better as well, but we see Kubrick develop as a director from his experience on this film.
Yeah.
This film, I was pleasantly surprised. It's been a while since I've watched this film. Yeah. I was pleasantly surprised by how much of it had that accuracy of the context, the wardrobe, the cinematography, that a lot of the really good classic Kubrick elements are there. And so it is really, really telling that this is an early Kubrick film.
Yeah.
And you can really see him growing as a director throughout his other movies. One to watch, not one I'd put at the top of the list.
Yeah.
But if you've got 3.5 hours on a Sunday afternoon and you want a nap because you will fall asleep halfway through, because what the fuck is he doing making a 3.5 hour film?
Who does he think he is? Peter Jackson?
This is a Sunday afternoon after dinner. You're too overfed, and it's on Channel 5 if you're in the UK. It's on the TV. There's adverts every 20 minutes, and you fall asleep halfway through, wake up, and not much has happened, so you carry on watching it. It's that film. It's a Sunday afternoon classic. But I wouldn't say it's a Kubrick classic. Kubrick is so much in a class of his own that anything but perfection in a film is bad for Kubrick.
Yeah.
This film by any other director is a good film. It's a well done, good film. Yes, it's a bit heavy-handed on the moralising and the propaganda, but it's a good film. It's a good mindless 3.5 hour watch. This compared to Ben-Hur.
Yeah.
This compared to other epics of the time is a good example of the genre.
Yeah.
Even though I still don't think it is part of the biblical epic genre. Because of that strong American propaganda and all of that in there.
Yeah, but like the biblical epic does have, like, you know, especially talking, you know, the Ten Commandments, and, you know, Ben-Hur does have that strong, you know, we are Judeo-Christian, we are America, manifest destiny kind of vibe. It like the definition of what I call the biblical epic is taking something tangentially biblical and making it more Christian, and thus and this and then tying it to American values.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, America is. If I was to point in the modern day context, America is the natural successor to Rome.
Yeah.
Obviously not geographically, obviously not in certain ways, but in its key values, in its Jeffersonian ideals, in manifest destiny, in all that stuff that America likes to pretend it doesn't have but really does and is secretly proud of.
In its Wilsonian approach to imperialism.
Yeah. It is the natural successor to Rome in the modern day.
Yeah.
1001 classicists are about to at me. Please don't. You know what I mean. This is reception. If you're a straight up classicist, don't at me.
Yeah.
And there's an entire stream on how American values, American optics, American politics, American culture likes to harken back to Rome to give itself gravitas that it doesn't, that is unearned and that it doesn't have.
Yeah.
I mean, for God's sake, even your founding myth of people arriving on a boat, fleeing persecution, fleeing the destruction of their home. Aeneas.
Yeah.
It's not.
And it's
not subtle, folks.
And it's telling that it is kind of telling that the sole purely American contribution to the canon of the biblical epic genre was written by a former Confederate.
Yeah. Also, do you really think America came up with the idea of white houses with columns on its own? Just saying. Just have a look at your architecture. It's all over it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've gone wildly off topic, so I think it's time to wrap up.
Yeah. So, and I think those are good final thoughts.
Yeah. Part of the canon of American propaganda, yes. A biblical epic, tangentially related. Although not biblical in the traditional sense. Kind of a tragedy of errors there.
I mean, if Ben-Hur counts as a biblical epic, I'd count Spartacus as a biblical epic.
Yeah, as in biblical era.
Yeah.
Although this predates the biblical era. Yeah, I see what they're getting at.
And it does date itself by tying it to Christianity.
Yeah. There's an argument that it's also religious propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, separate from it being American propaganda, that it's religious propaganda as well. And you can take that all over.
That is one final one thing I'd like to point out before we go off is how the opening narration is actually a subversion of the biblical genre trope, because usually it's a screen crawl.
Yeah. You're not missing anything if you haven't seen it. If you're interested, if you're curious about this stuff, there's plenty of essays you can write about it if you want to. If you're feeling lazy and you want an easy topic, not a film I will actively seek out to rewatch. I don't think. Very much. I would say if you need one good reason to watch this film, It's that you will never watch Life of Brian in the same way again once you've seen Spartacus.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
worth it just for that.
Yeah.
And that's my final thought.
And my final thought before we go on to shilling is blame Douglas.
Yeah. Blame Douglas. Although in that one specific instance he was valid, and I'll grant it.
Yeah. So, any shilling you'd like to have?
No shilling, but I would like to point out that for once we haven't gone on longer than the film.
Yeah, we've gone on just about as long as the film.
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's see. Shilling. I am 15 away from 200.
Come on.
Currently at 185.
Come on, let's get Ring to 200 before the new year and we can then get them drunk.
Yes. And also, schedule's going to be a bit wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey for the upcoming month.
It's December, it's always wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
Yeah. And, of course, next week is Secular D&D as usual, and next week on Media Musings, we are beginning Animation Month with either Noodle has the actual list.
Shit! I knew I forgot something. I promised last week I'd look. Shit. You'll find out next week.
I'll probably ping it out on Twitter. I know what the 4 are, and I know what the 2 options are that we are going to start the month off with. So tune in next week for either The Emperor's New Groove or The Road to El Dorado. So I know we were starting with one of those because they're so similar that we kind of had to split them up.
Yeah.
And obviously, Into the Spider-Verse is going to be the week before the week before No Way Home hits theaters.
Cool.
So next couple weeks, either Emperor's New Groove or Road to El Dorado. Keep an eye on my Twitter for which one. And then,
I think we said Road because it came out first.
And then week after that will be Into the Spider-Verse, which definitely deserved its Oscar for Best Animated Picture.
I don't know, I haven't seen it yet, so that's something to look forward to.
Well, I mean, just based on the animation alone.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll move to taglines.
Take care, be good, and if you can't be good, remember, use your noodle.
And of course, this is extra telling, in light of everything we've discussed over Kubrick month, and especially over this last stream. But the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think on. Too often, we forget that.